Thank you for tuning into this week's podcast episode of John Aloud. This week, I got the chance to talk with Heather Harness, who is from the YouTube channel Harness Thought. She has an excellent series on there about reconciliation within the church, and I felt after watching those videos that this is a conversation that needs to be had amongst the Christian church. And so luckily I was able to set up a conversation with her, and I believe this is a very productive conversation, and a conversation that honestly needs to be heard by a lot of people and had by a lot of people. If you would like to support this podcast to help these conversations continue, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you most use, as it helps out tremendously. I hope you enjoy this podcast, and thank you for listening. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you.
So I did hear that you were a homeschool teacher, that's correct?
Yes, I am.
So how rigged is the Teacher of the Year awards in your school?
That depends on which child you ask and what day.
You may or may not know. You may or may not know I'm a product of homeschooling as well, and I can confirm that at least the school I went to, it was a very dictatorship, authoritarian rigged system when it came to... I'm joking.
Well, I actually don't, I've done several different types of homeschooling. You know, there's parent-led, there's, video school and all that. Right now we're doing video school. So I'm not teaching so much. I'm more of a warden is what I would call it.
Yeah.
But, make sure people stay in their cells and get their work done.
Is it PCC, the Pensacola Christian College?
It's a Becca, yeah. It is.
That's the one I actually did in 6th grade. I had the video school in 6th grade. I wonder if it's the same.
I actually went there to college.
So. Oh, that's actually really cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're maybe not doing as much teaching anymore, but have you gotten to utilize YouTube with homeschooling? Because I know it wasn't really a thing when I was in homeschool, but I'm wondering if it's more so now, maybe?
Mm-hmm. I say for the most part, YouTube for me, especially as the teacher, was more for encouragement, because where I was living before I moved to Tennessee, there weren't many families that were homeschooling. And so just getting on and seeing other moms that were in the same boat as me, I'm what you would call an accidental homeschooler. So It's not something that was ever in my desire whatsoever. But I lived in a place where the schools were not meeting even the state standards. So I figured, it's probably better for me to do the best I can by my children.
Gotcha.
Instead of leaving them to the state in that sense.
So speaking of YouTube, like I mentioned earlier, you have that really cool series on reconciliation, which I think if anyone is watching should go watch that.
Thank you.
For I guess myself and also everyone else, how would you define reconciliation?
Wow. Okay.
In the easiest way possible for my small brain to understand.
Easiest way possible. I would have to say responsibility, which might sound strange, but I would actually have to say reconciliation is 3 things. It has to do with forgiveness. That's, I guess the given, but I would say the 3 things that are necessary for reconciliation, because it's really hard to pin down, would be you have to have justice, you have to have responsibility from both parties, the offended and the offender, and you also have to be somewhat in relationship with that person. It's not that person or entity or whatever. It's not something that you can just shut off from your life in a sense. In this society especially, it's very common for people to say, oh, well, they're toxic, let me just stay away from them.
Cancel them right now.
Yes, canceled. So you see how much TV I watch. Not that much. But basically, in order to really truly reconcile with somebody, you actually have to be in relationship with them. So
okay. And so I guess in a perfect scenario, what does that look like in the church?
Well,
So I mean, we want to if we're wanting to move forward with reconciliation.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be some real life application. In a perfect world, of course, everyone gets along and stuff.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. And so, like,
I would say.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
Saying?
how would that look like
In the church?
in the real world, kind of?
In the real world, and especially in the church, I would say that people really need to get a true grasp on what forgiveness and reconciliation really are. And I think in our American system, we don't see that much.
Forgiveness or reconciliation?
I'm sorry.
Forgiveness or reconciliation? I mean, probably reconciliation.
I don't think we really understand either of them very well.
I mean, I would agree.
Yeah, we're very independent in how we think and how we approach topics. So just the fact that we don't have communal society, in a sense, having to work things out in order for, the betterment of your community.
Yeah.
So really, it's a pretty loaded question. A lot of it is just ingrained in our personalities, but
I mean, I guess with forgiveness, it's probably fair to say that in American society, people have become more and more independent as time has gone on, with just due to the riches of America, and then also just technology in general. And the more and more independent you are, the less dependable you are on other people, and so there isn't that need to forgive. In comparison, it's like 50 to 100 to 200, 400 years ago, you kind of had to make up with people, otherwise you may all die.
Yeah, true.
And so in today, that's less of a survival need, and so maybe that feeds into why like forgiveness isn't as common, I guess, or inherently understood. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. It's just even just relationships, communication. I mean, we're so stunted in our ability to do any of those things. It seems nowadays. I mean, we can go into a million things. We can go into, this, cancel culture. We can go into, this bipartisan everything, demonizing one side or the other, not knowing how to even, have a conversation with somebody at dinner without distraction, our selfishness. I mean, there are so many factors that are playing into this perfect storm that's created. That has been created over several hundred years, but
we're seeing some of the fruit of it now.
We're seeing a lot of that. And we're also seeing the fruit of one of the biggest problems to me is that the church should have been at the forefront. The church generally as a whole should have been at the forefront of what needed to be reconciled. And so I guess the first question for me, if I was talking to someone, would be, well, what needs to be reconciled? Because to a lot of people, they don't see a problem. They don't know that the problem's there because we're so separate especially on Sunday mornings, we're so separate. I just have the good fortune of sometimes of being in a situation where I'm interracially married. So, and we've made the decision, just to go to the church that we knew the Lord wanted us to go to, which just so happened to be a Caucasian church this time. But yeah, there is a lot in the way of reconciliation. I think it's possible.
Yeah. But... I had a point, but I was very intrigued with what you were saying.
No, go for it.
So I guess in my situation, we have predominantly white people at our church, but of course there's a couple black people at the church, and we all get along pretty much, but it's not like it's a predominantly one or the other, or say it's predominantly white, but it's not like we're bringing in more and more or whatever. So of course our mission or agenda, if you want to call it that, as Christians is to preach the gospel to all the corners of the earth. And so if there is I guess, seeds of resentment on either side or hatred on either side, how does that conversation begin for someone who's wanting to reconcile, and of course, I know you mentioned like it has to be like a personal connection, of course, and there's all that, of course, but how does one begin that conversation to begin with? You know, because like I want to help. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I know I can't just go out to random people and be like, "Hey, come to church," whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, how does that conversation begin in your eyes?
Um, Pretty simply, actually. Invite somebody for coffee or over for lunch. And you'll find very quickly if you take an interest in someone's personal, life, that eventually what plagues them will come out. That's almost in any realm. So
I have
that's
found, at least in my years of working with the public, that if you talk to someone more than 5 minutes, you'll eventually, for some reason, they'll just spill out their entire life story to you real quick.
yeah, yeah, they will.
And so I can see that there.
Yeah, basically, I mean, the goal is to make them, whether they look the same as you or not,
mhm,
comfortable. Like, I think a lot of times we come at it from the perspective of how can I learn more? How can I help? When a lot of times it's what do I need to learn is
mhm.
the question. It's not necessarily how can I help, but what am I not getting? And I learned that actually pretty quickly when I moved to Appalachia with my husband,
Mhm.
because I was, well, the odd girl out there, definitely. And I had to learn how to make friends and, get to know people there. And a lot of it had to do with trust. And so, really you're establishing rapport, trust with whatever person at church.
Would you say
So
there's a commonality of things that have to be learned, or is it more so on an individual basis?
I think it's common. It's a commonality at first. And
Mm-hmm.
then, as you get to know someone, get to, appreciate them, get to see their humanity,
Mm-hmm.
see how they're the same as you,
Yeah.
see that they're just as uncomfortable as you are. Sometimes even more so.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that, being the Black woman going into, this place where it was funny, I would even walk into a Walmart and people would be like, why are you here? Where are you from? And
I can only
like to
imagine.
me, yeah, well, it happened all the time. Like
Yeah.
people that had never seen a Black person in public. I remember somebody asked me or came up to me. He's like, "Oh my goodness, girl, you're browner than a biscuit." And I was like, "What?" Like I just looked at him like, "Who?
You said that
What?
was in
Where?"
Tennessee,
No, this was in Ohio. And
Ohio. Oh, that sounds
well,
even better.
actually, we lived in a tri-state area, so it was like Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
just imagine any of those stereotypes, which I hate putting stereotypes on people.
yeah.
But if you were to have Hollywood stereotype something, then yeah, that's
Yeah.
where it was. And I just remember thinking, what year is it and what planet am I on?
Yeah.
But then also see that they're just as uncomfortable as you are,
Mm-hmm.
if not more so. Yeah.
And so I guess when it comes to that uncomfortableness, I know it's not always something that can be easily overcome quickly or
No.
anything. Um, have you know since you've probably been in this situation more than I have, is there a fast track to get over that or no?
Just do it, really, like Nike says. For me, I have found that I'm usually the one that's going to break the ice.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is that more of a personality thing, or is it more so of a forced thing?
it's because I learned to do it.
Okay.
Um, when I was in Ohio, one of the things that the Lord really worked on me about was a man or woman that has friends must show themselves friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go out of my way, honestly, in a lot of ways to do that with people that were, had their preconceived ideas of Blacks and were open about it.
Yeah.
so, um, so yeah, a lot of forgiveness plays into that. um, and that's another thing. I guess being gracious with people, like just realizing that people are going to say stupid stuff. I mean,
I do all the
do
time.
that all the time. Yeah. Like, I mean, I do all the time. I walked into a friend's house the other day and she's a white girl and I didn't mean it this way, but I looked around and was like, wow, it's really white in here. And it's because we were looking at,
Was
I
there
came over to
Starbucks
borrow,
everywhere?
no, I came over actually to borrow white paint. But when I thought about it, I was just like, okay, that was the dumbest thing. Like, I mean, we're gonna make mistakes, and
Yeah.
that is what it is to be human, to err, and then to forgive is, Christ-like.
I like that. Now, when it comes to, I guess, people's, how would I say it the best way? So in reconciliation, like you mentioned, there's the offender and the offendee, or whatever the correct term there is.
Offended.
Offended, yeah. Offended, yeah. Offended, obviously.
Same thing.
Is there a need for it to be one side or the other who's supposed to start reconciliation, or is it either or? I would imagine that the offender would need to be, I guess, maybe obligated to, but I can see it also being the offender or the offended who could also start that process. Or how would that work best?
Yes. And like, honestly, I have wrestled over this one, but the Bible is pretty clear on this one. It says if your brother has anything against you, you go to him, in a sense. As in, people can take that both ways. Like, as in, if you have done something to hurt them. But a lot of times what I found is people do things to hurt you and you don't know, or they don't know that they did it. So if you have aught against your brother, then go to him. And oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to look that one up just to make sure I get it right. Huh?
That's no problem.
That's no problem. So I think it's if your brother.
That's the one that forgives 7 times 70, right?
No, this one is if your brother sins against you. This is the ESV. Go and tell him his fault. So the interesting thing about this, and this is what I learned in Ohio, and what the Lord has taught me over and over again, which I wish I didn't have to learn it. I wish I wasn't so thick-headed.
Yeah.
But if they sin against you, you can go and tell him, like confront them in the proper way. It's not about, you going and saying, you did this to me and you did this to me and I forgive you. That's not what it means.
It's a very self-centered forgiveness there.
Yes. But then, it says if he listens to you, and you're supposed to, there's a process to it. If someone has offended you alone, you go to him alone. And if he listens to you, the Bible says you've gained a brother. And that's the truth. So honestly, I think it's the responsibility of both parties to reconcile. Because the person that has been offended has the harder work to do, because like they obviously do. They have to take on the offense, in a sense. They have to forgive, and then they have to humble themselves enough to go and say, the relationship, or at least my relationship with God, is worth more to me than my pride and holding you at arm's distance. Showing you Christ is worth more to me than my comfort levels.
That's huge right there. I like that a lot.
It hurts like a mother. Like it really hurts. But really, I mean, Christ has shown us that, and he's even done this with us. Like, we offended him. He had every right to, throw us in hell and not come and save us. He has every right to, but we offended him. And then what does he do? Isaiah 53, he comes and takes on our suffering. He takes on all of these things, and he then pays for it. Yeah. And he has the scars to prove it. So to be Christ-like is to forgive and to reconcile. And, that's part of the fellowship of his sufferings. Okay. It sucks though.
Yeah, no.
Can I say that? I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine.
Okay.
So I can see that from that aspect. But I would say there's also a humility maybe, or a graciousness from the other side of things as well that has to be at least because this is all inner church that we're talking about. So we're hypothetically talking about all Christians. That there's a grace and a humility that needs to be shown on the quote unquote offender side of things.
Yes, and that is where we run into some big painful problems.
Oh yeah?
Yes, I've run into it several times. We have to be willing to accept that that is a possibility. But yeah, when you go and you say, hey, this is where I'm at, especially which I don't know if you wanted the conversation to go this direction.
No, that's totally fine.
With this whole last election, all of the racial everything that has happened, which, believe it or not, I don't watch the news a lot.
Same.
It's not good for me. So especially, being in a Republican Democrat family, it's too much for me. So,
I got a whole theory on why this is so bad and everything that I haven't been able to fully construct into a video. So when I say I understand why that's such a struggle about not even watching the news, I understand.
Yeah. Well, the news honestly is not owned by the Lord.
No.
That's clear. There is a prince of the power of the air, and I personally take that to be quite literal. Our media system is bent on one thing, and that is selling a story no matter what. It's
all about that money.
It is, and power. But I guess that's an aside.
Yeah.
What I've run into, I think, is pride. And when you hit it, like when you come to someone, so for instance, I went before some pastors and I spoke about just the issues I was seeing. And I came by myself. Actually, I came with my husband, and it was me and a group of 6 Caucasian pastors. I hope you don't mind me saying white. Is that?
I am completely offended if you say white. Okay. No, not at all.
Oh, good. Okay. So, and, I go by Black African-American. I'm actually, Spanish and African American, but I pretty much even though I'm not African at all.
Yeah.
So it's just, anyways. So I went there basically by myself, and I told them that there were some things that would be a deterrent to people like myself in this church. And I remember it felt like I was hit by a wall of animosity in a sense, and pride. And, I do understand that, people can get very defensive when you're telling them something that has hurt you. So there definitely has to be some humility on the side of the offender. And then you're also going to get into the argument of, well, none of these people ever had slaves, so we tend to get into these race baiting, and just we get into these arguments that are led by the terminology that honestly the media has kind of thrown at us as a pastor will say, oh, well, we're not trying to be woke or something. Or I'm like, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with loving your brother. We take on these terms that we hear. And that's another reason I don't like listening to the media so much, just because they tend to promote these things. Even subconsciously, we take it on. Even myself, even in humor, we're kind of sponges. We take in what's comfortable, and we start getting on one side or the other. But yeah, pride is definitely an issue on the opposite side. And this idea that, I have nothing to do with it, which naturally you would want to distance yourself.
Well, I've had a point for a while that I've been trying to, I guess, fully think through,
Okay, go
and
for it.
it was, when did I start this? I think 2015 or 2016, somewhere in that crazy time frame.
Hmm.
That if there are societal problems, if you're excusing yourself from the blame of it, then you're removing yourself from the solution of it. And
Mm,
so I don't know if that, because I talked with some more smart people, people smarter than me, about it as well, and they weren't entirely sure about claiming the blame for it. There may be a better way to say that.
yeah.
But I think, especially when it comes to like reconciliation within the church,
Hmm.
there's definitely at least a burden or a responsibility to take on all sides of the matter, but there's still it's on all sides of the matter. So it means everyone's
Yeah,
involved in taking some of that responsibility.
yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think the word, and you had talked about this, is it a blame issue or whatever? It's not. Like blame
Mm-hmm.
is the wrong word altogether.
Yeah.
Because those people, you know, Thomas Jefferson and all these, with his, we're all created equal except for, a couple hundred people on your
Yeah.
farm. Um, like those people aren't here, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, so, I've run into this question, well, we didn't do anything. Like, so why are y'all still mad? We're not mad at you. We're mad at what we have to deal with because of your ancestry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's not even being angry with them in particular. Like, it's just, there are so many, man, when the devil sets a trap, he knows how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he puts so many problems in the church like this. But when you said responsibility, um, I have to think of it like if there's a couple that's married, and let's say, one spouse betrays another. Um, if there's ever going to be reconciliation, both spouses have to take responsibility for something. Like the
Yeah.
spouse that's hurt, they can they can wallow in self-pity. They can, and I'm not saying this is someone that doesn't know, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been there. They can wallow into I could wallow in self-pity. They can blame. They can say this was not my fault, this was yours, and all of those things could be true.
Mm-hmm.
But if they want to be whole, if they want to grow through it and not be killed or destroyed by it, mentally, spiritually, whatever, they have to take responsibility for their own self. I mean, Jesus himself said it is impossible that offenses would not come.
Mm-hmm.
They will come. We're to expect it. And that's another thing. Like, we're just so sugar coated over here. Like, we're so separate from even, the way our clothes are made, like our food, like we're separate from all of these systems that are difficult.
Yeah.
There are hard things in the United States. I'm not saying that. There's poverty here. There's all kinds of, there's horrible things everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But just as a society, we really do gloss over a lot in the Western world.
Yeah. And one of the bigger, or not bigger, sorry, newer, I guess, issues that people have been talking about or starting to talk about it more so is mental health things.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm remembering correctly, it's in the Bible. Sorry, I don't have a quote for it, but it just came to my mind that unforgiveness or
Mm-hmm.
bitterness is what it was. Bitterness rots you at the bones. Basically eats you up from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we can see that kind of with mental health things where it comes to like depression and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and all these things that are
Yeah.
literally eating us from within. And I'm wondering if it may come from unforgiveness where you're building up bitterness over time just from
Mm-hmm.
things you're not wanting to take responsibility for.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like this. So let's say with the African American community or with anybody that's
Mm-hmm.
been hurt. What does that person that's been hurt, what's the natural thing for them to do?
Take a
It's
defensive
to
stance on it. Get defensive.
exactly. Well, yeah, to take offense in a sense, but what do we do in what's a defensive stance? It's a wall. We build walls.
Okay. Yeah.
The more we build walls, the less that gets in.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that's what's inside, if it's not let out, if it's not dealt with properly, it will poison you, eventually. It's incredible. Like the Bible says that a brother that is offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And you got a lot of brothers and sisters in the United States that are quite offended and have reason to be.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into the, economics and, all of because I know that there's responsibility on our side. I follow Thomas Sowell. I'm kind of more of I appreciate what Denzel Washington has to say. It is the family that needs to pick up. It's all these things. But yes, there's also a hard row to hoe in a sense. And I've lived that, not nearly what my parents had. But when you have these walls built up, you're not letting much in. And the tighter you build those walls, the harder it is for even good things to get in. So water or anything like that. And it's funny, like even in scripture times, you hear about somebody besieging a city. What do? They basically starve them out. They rot on the inside. And a lot of this, there's a passage of scripture that this whole situation in the United States reminds me of, especially in the church. And it's in Matthew 24, I believe. It has to do with the last days. And just being offended and what people will look like. Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. Oh yeah, it's Matthew 24, 10 through 13. It says, "Then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. And then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." There's some interesting things that you don't see in the English in this version, basically, because the Greek in a lot of ways is so much richer. One of the things that's scary is not just the progression of being offended, betrayal, and then hatred, but also this word in verse 12 says lawlessness will abound. That lawlessness there has to do with not being submitted to God, basically not being submitted to godly authority. That's kind of what we're seeing. Like Christians, we're so worried about our freedoms that we've forgotten about what God says about loving our neighbor, choosing others over ourselves. Yeah. So it's actually kind of terrifying to me to read these verses sometimes and think, wow, lots of people are offended, and this, spirit of offense is a real thing. The word for offense in the Bible was scandalon. And I don't know if you're familiar with that word.
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, well, here you go. Here's a little lesson. Scandalon was basically the word for a trap that was set for, it's like the bait stick on the trap that was set for like a small bird or prey or whatever. And basically, offense is something like somebody gets offended not by what they've done to themselves. It's not their sin, it's somebody else's sin against them. And so I've heard people call it, the bait of Satan is basically offense, because I found that a lot of times you'll see good people that try to live righteously, they just lead pretty good lives, but then someone will do something that will just break them in a sense. And the Bible actually refers to that as being, given over to the devil. Even as a Christian, like it's like you are tempted in a way that's too great for you. And in a sense, this is the opportunity, as African Americans or Blacks or whatever, minorities in the United States, since we have been offended so greatly, we have the opportunity to show Christ to our brothers of lighter pigmentation. But what ends up happening is we end up I guess, holding this offense against them. And what that actually is condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
When we start, not saying that what was done wasn't condemnation worthy, I
Yeah.
mean, not even talking about slavery. I'm talking about, my parents' age. I'm talking about what I experienced 2 or 3 years ago, like
Mm-hmm.
it's, or, regularly. It's not
Yeah.
that these things aren't worthy of that, but when things like that happen, it's supposed to, for the Christian, for the believer, be an outlet. That breaking is supposed to be an outlet for Christ to show through us.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we end up walling it up, and we end up becoming poisoned by it. And instead, the Bible says, we're doing the work of Satan. And what is the work of Satan? It is to steal, kill, and destroy. And what does he do day and night? He condemns.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I really struggle. And I have a hard time with the reconciliation bit, because I know from personal experience, I had a situation where I had to forgive someone that, did me pretty bad, pretty roughly for 17 years. Mm. And I remember one day the Lord, like, I was just like, what do I do with this situation? And I remember the Lord was like, pray for her because she will fall under judgment. And I remember being scared, like, wait a second. I don't know that what I went through, which was not okay by any psychologists, police officers, whatever. It wasn't okay what I went through. But I remember thinking to myself, but to fall into the hands of God, would I want that for anybody? As a Christian, as a believer, would I want someone to fall under God's judgment? And I had to tell myself, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like, because I know I deserve that. I deserve so much worse than I could do to anybody here on earth. So really, this idea of reconciliation in the church, I really had to scratch my head and, even, cry tears over this idea that I don't know how many people are actually believing Christ. This has really made me question, are we just societal Christians? I don't know if that's a term, but I mean, are we just a Christian society, or do we actually have the Holy Spirit?
I do think, at least from what I've seen from the virtual world and the physical world, that it does appear that there's a lot more Christians in the virtual world than there actually are in the IRL. Meaning, like, there's people who have the claim that they say, I am Christian, but of course you look at their life, you look at their current actions, and of course you can be forgiven and everything, but there's a difference between someone who is actively seeking versus someone who just has the title. And I feel like there's a lot more people who have the title. In fact, I think there's a lot of things that social media has done that I don't think all of us have fully realized yet.
Yeah.
Just because of how powerful of a tool it is.
Yeah.
And I did want to make one point with social media. So social media, its purpose, its goal is, of course, to make money. It's a company. And the way they make money is having someone on the platform. The longer you're on the platform, the more money they make. You're the product, essentially. And so if you're seeing, and I think this plays into some of the conflict that we see on the lines of race in the church. I think this plays into it as well. So you'll see posts, or of course, my feed will look 100% different than yours because my interests, my skin color, my age, literally every little difference between you and I is marked within a social media platform because they're trying to service people with different things. People are trying to market to different things.
Yeah.
And so if an algorithm sees that this post, this imaginary post here, is very popular with people who are ages 40 to 70, of white skin color, of this region of the United States, it's going to push that to all those types of people who fit that category. And so and that's unregardless of what the content of the post is. And so if it's just looking for engagement rates, that post could be something that is negative to someone else, negative to another race, negative to another person or whatever. It could be giving a false view of a race entirely, just because that's it's being eaten up by these kind of people. And that goes for literally anyone. Like there could be a post that's completely negative about white people that's mostly false, and it's being eaten up by a certain category of people that aren't white. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And so there's this information that we're all taking in, because we take so much information in now, way more than we have in the past. And we just don't know how to actually process that much information.
Yeah, I think we live in an information society, but we've lost the ability to think for ourselves.
Yes.
So
100%.
Like, and to weigh things with common sense, we're very quick to jump on emotional trains and not quick to regulate ourselves in that sense. So yeah, this is definitely, I mean, mental health plays into it. I would have to say in my own personal life, with, just learning how to navigate in the world as, a person, not even an African-American female or, Latina X, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Just my ability to think things through has really helped, to have some foresight. That's really not something that is taught anymore. Logic. It's really hard to find. Yeah. And like, so I even remember one of the beefs I had with the school I went to growing up. I was frustrated with them because I felt like they weren't teaching us how to combat anything. They were just teaching us. We did a random debate on, should creationism be taught in public schools? And I purposefully took the side of no. Like I took the super liberal side. It's Christian schools, but I took the liberal side, and I won by a landslide. And it was because I was like, they're coming at me with just arguments of that they've been, told, like, well, the Bible says this, the Bible says this. Yes, but they don't believe the Bible. So like, how do we as Christians have conversations, especially now with the persona that Christianity has been given, especially white Christianity, because my husband, is a white, middle-aged Caucasian male, I guess. Yeah. Like, so basically he's the enemy in most of the world, especially if, he decides to vote Republican for something. Heaven forbid, Yeah. So it's just one of those, like, how does someone learn to have a conversation with someone else? And that's where our independence comes back in. We have these big, beautiful churches, and it's almost like we only associate with people within them. Like, and we're only attracting a certain kind of person. It's like, it's kind of just this big
echo chamber.
What did you say?
Echo chamber.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's like, okay, in Acts, and in Jesus's time, right before and after his ascension, what happened? God scattered them on purpose. Like, I mean, they basically had to get out and find other Christians in different places. And, Christianity spread like wildfire. Basically, it was forced to, in a sense.
Yeah.
But we don't have that here. So we get real comfortable with people that think like us and look like us and listen to the same music and, I can't remember how they used to say it. I don't drink, smoke, or chew, and I don't walk with those who do, kind of thing. Like, I mean, we're just so insulated. And, I found that, and, I could be guilty of that as well because, I homeschool my kids, I'm insulating my children, but that's another argument. I think to myself, but they're kids. I don't need to throw them to the wolves yet. At the same time, I have these conversations with my children. They're mixed. And so, I have to tell them, as a Christian, there are other types of Christianity. There are other, I mean, that believe, what the word of God says. Not, I'm not talking about, getting into Mormonism or, Jehovah's Witnesses or anything like that. Any of the I guess, fringe.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna say
guess I could
fringe
call
for
it.
you if you weren't gonna say it.
Yeah. Like,
I'll
so
say
I'm
it.
not trying to offend anybody or anything like that. But like I grew up Catholic first, and
Mm-hmm.
then we went to Independent Baptist Church. And so that was already kind of two polar opposites of Christianity
Mm-hmm.
right there. And, I'm a African American Latino family going to a white, very white church, in the South.
Uh-huh.
My parents were, segregated up until their late teens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, and they were, from North Carolina, so it was heavy there. Um, so yeah, just different worlds. But one of my beefs with, I guess, the way we run churches, Christianity, any of it, is whether it's black or white, it's like we have so many preferences involved. And that's, we're getting into, what style of music, what,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. They can be great, but I remember, what was it? Paul says, I've become all things to all people. We don't do that with our church. We want what's comfortable to us, what makes us feel
Yeah.
closer spiritually to the Lord, what helps us worship. I have to think to myself, I hope I'm not on a soapbox here, but I have to think to myself, the people I would call real Christians out in China, that,
Mm-hmm.
have to have their silent churches. I don't think they care about any of these things that we think are such a big deal.
Yeah.
What makes our worship experience worth it? Like, I mean, oh my goodness. And that's the thing. We're trying to deal with this topic of reconciliation in this environment.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, Lord, I don't know. Is this what Jeremiah felt? Like,
Yeah.
just the weeping prophet, like, it's hopeless. This is all the, horrible things that we're dealing with down here. Do you not see us kind of situation?
Yeah.
He does. And he has grace for it. But it will take the individuals taking on the responsibility themselves. And hopefully eventually that takes on, or it, I guess, moves up to the authorities.
Yeah.
That's another thing. The church authority can't mandate it, just like the government can't mandate equality in the work system. They can't.
Yet.
They tried. And what we're doing is right now we're living the government's trying to do that. And yeah, that's an aside again too. I'm so sorry.
No. There's a point I wanted to go back to. I believe you said comfortable, or like when the church gets comfortable. I think maybe a better word there would have been complacent. We get very complacent in the church.
Yeah.
And when people are complacent, you're comfortable, number one, but then your guard isn't always up. Your church's guard isn't always up. There could be things that are leaking in slowly, very, very slowly, like unnoticeably slow, that infects the church's doctrine of a specific church. And it could be very minute, but of course, if something very minute gets infected, it's going to grow if not addressed.
Yeah.
And so I do like that you mentioned that the church is getting very comfortable, because
I like complacent though, because that gives the idea that they stop caring. And then eventually what people only care about then is not the gospel or the greater good of their fellow neighbor, as Jesus would have said. They start caring a whole lot more about their own freedoms, their own comforts. And that's what we've seen unfold in our
church to
churches.
end by 11:30, so that way I can make my way to the Mexican restaurant, so then after the Mexican restaurant I can watch my football. Preacher, you're going over time here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that might be the white people version.
That may be.
Like, I mean, culturally.
Yeah.
But
that's the stereotype, at least where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the truth. I mean, okay, so I'm used to, like, I've gone to black churches, and there's the joke of, you can, be in church for 6 hours and then go downstairs, make a sandwich, come back, eat some potatoes out. Let's argue about that too. So yeah, there's preferences that we all have. But yeah, it's, when I think about it, and even when I came to, do that series on reconciliation, it's, believe it or not, it's not done. It's just, I felt so overwhelmed by all of the nuances that are involved in what reconciliation looks like,
Well,
what
to
it
be
looks like
fair, it's
at
an
it.
extremely complex topic. So, I mean, like, I can
Yeah.
understand that from an individual's point of view. I'm going to take on this entire idea. It's like,
Yeah. Like
that's
part of me
hard.
was like, how dumb can you be, Heather? Like, what were you smoking? But, I know that was the Lord too.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like I have been in white churches for 25 years and it never was something I wanted to approach. That's
Mm-hmm.
not my personality. I like people. I don't really care what you look like. I just like people. I will say that I do see your skin color. Like I do see color.
Yeah.
I'm a designer. I like color. So, and but I know how to appreciate different colors. And I'm not like with design, you get used to people ripping up your work or telling you that's stupid. You just kind of have to get used to being uncomfortable in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. And we've so coddled ourselves, like, and coddled our children. And, here's your, participation awards. It's like, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm sounding like a grandmother or something. But like, I'm kind of just looking around at society, at what I'm seeing on,
Mm-hmm.
what little bit of TikTok comes through, or YouTube or Facebook, or even from my grown friends
Yeah.
that I'm like, you've been a Christian longer than me and you had a Christian time. Do you not see this? Do you not see what you're saying or what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing? Um, there's definitely a lack of discernment. And all of that goes back to the Holy Spirit. Really, I mean, the question of, is racial reconciliation even possible with the
Mm-hmm.
church? Um, I would say I have two natures. My pessimistic, um, fatalist self would say, absolutely not. Look at the world.
Yeah.
But, the side of me that's, redeemed would say, of course, with Christ, all things are possible. And he makes a way. But what I think people are not willing to recognize is that reconciliation costs more than the offense.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, if somebody breaks their leg, that break causes a lot of pain. Surgery will cause a lot of pain. But then the problem is not only do you have the break in the surgery, you're not fine until you work that thing out for
Mm-hmm.
months.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is they say, I think statistically, most people that go through rehab only heal to about 70%, because they think that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when we, as churches, decide, oh, the world's falling apart, we're going to have a racial reconciliation series at our church for 2 months or 2 weeks, or as I was told, we had somebody come on a Wednesday night to talk about this, what else can we possibly do?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay. Good, thanks for that. I think to
Yeah.
myself, in the scientific world, in the mental health world, actually, if there is an offense, or especially an ongoing abuse, it takes at least a third of the time to properly heal. And that's if you do everything properly.
Yeah.
So let's say if somebody goes through an abusive childhood, let's say they have been abused for 15 years, it's going to take
Mm-hmm.
them probably 3 to 5 years of constant work, brain work, mental work, to rewire their brains, their synapses, all of these bad things that have been
They've been
grown
yeah.
inside of them. Yeah. And that in the United States, we have a couple hundred years of problems.
Yeah.
So, it's our responsibility to work those things out. Yeah, we can wait till we
Mm-hmm.
get to heaven, but to be honest, I think we're keeping people from it with
Mm-hmm.
our crappy testimonies of not being able to do that. Like we care too much about ourselves. We love our comfortable, complacent lives in this world too much.
Yeah.
And that is just not how Christ operates.
Yeah.
It's just not what he did. So,
And I think we can close on this next thing
yeah.
because we've gone over quite a bit. And
Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
I've loved this conversation so far, but
Have we been 2 hours? Oh my goodness.
no, I don't think so.
Oh, that's how okay.
So I guess sort of as kind of a nice little wrap up list.
Yeah.
What can an individual, either on either side of the offender or offended side of things, what's those first steps to actually getting towards reconciliation? Because of course the actual reconciliation part is a very long process and also very difficult process, but you still have to take the first few steps. So what are those first few steps?
I would say for both sides, especially for the offender side, the white churches, I guess, if you want to say it. Like, I hate even saying that because I'm like, white churches today didn't do that. But
for lack of a better term.
Yes.
Yeah.
They really need to see what justice actually, they need to seek justice. Like, what is justice to people? What looks like justice in the world for what has happened, and has that happened for the people that have been offended against? So I would say see that first, genuinely, not what you think is good enough,
not self-serving justice, but justice as justice is.
And also just realizing that for the person that has been offended, there's a wound there, and that takes time to heal. And this is a corporate problem, but it's also an individual problem. These people have also dealt, there's the history, but we've also dealt with things in our personal lives. I've been called certain things driving down the road, or been treated a certain way, or have been passed, somebody's been passed over for a job because of their name or their hair or whatever, or picked on, just, so what does that look like in their personal lives? Like, actually care about that truly, not just to make yourself feel better or for me to feel better. But then number 2 is see that it's the responsibility of both parties, yes, but act like the responsibility is all yours.
Yeah.
So,
that.
when I went through stuff in my own, life, regardless of whether they, come to the Lord or get right on their own, I still have my relationship with the Lord to deal with. And so he's going to tell me to do some uncomfortable things that are going to humble me, even when I don't want to be humbled, or I don't even think I deserve to be humbled in a situation. Take responsibility for those things with humility. And I would say number 3, to be in relationship with people different than you. Like, strive to do it, and be apologetic if you have to. Like, I mean, don't go in like, everything. Like, I learned that firsthand. I had so many ideas of what Appalachia would be like. And seriously, some of the most beautiful, my favorite people in the world are still up there in that area. And I miss them terribly now. And I miss what they brought to the table that I can't seem to find where I'm at now. In a suburban cities environment. So just be in relationship with people, and listen to the Holy Spirit. You cannot go wrong with that. He knows exactly what the person in front of you needs. Maybe that person needs to see you stutter over your words.
It's more real.
It is, and it puts people at ease to see that you're human. Like, show your humanity. Don't show like, oh, well, I've got this together and I'm here to help. Because honestly, for us, we can think, oh, you're trying to be a white savior. Oh, okay. We don't need that. Which, that's another stereotype. But at the same time, we've seen so many pictures. But that's another joke. But anyways.
One thing I did want to go back to with the whole justice side of things, because maybe I can just because I'm more so on that side, not individually, but just culturally or whatever. One cool point that I learned a while ago when it came to Nazi Germany, the statistical likelihood that if I were in, not just because I'm a white male or whatever, but just an individual in Germany at that time, the likelihood that I would have actually been one of the people who would of help the Jews escape is
Mm-hmm.
very, very small. And so applying that today, the chance that I would actually be one of the people who would stand up for justice, this goes for every individual, but any person who would actually stand up for justice is very, very small, because doing the right thing is actually very difficult. It's only the right thing when it's not easy, if that makes sense. So if we're doing the right thing because I'm stopping at traffic lights because, one, that's the law, and then two, if I don't, I get fined. Well, obviously it's easy to stop at that because I'm avoiding these consequences.
Yeah.
But if what's right has consequences and I'm still doing that, that's where most people don't actually follow through with what's right.
Yeah, they're scared. It's funny that you brought up Nazi Germany with that, because I've been studying I study religion too, because I like to. And I was looking at the role of the church, and specifically in the I guess approval of Nazism, period, this Aryan society, what the links they went through to get all that stuff approved. And then the vast majority of people just accepting it. And that's kind of that complacency you were talking about. Like, people just accept until they are faced with, oh, my comfort is about to be messed up. So no, I love what you said there. It makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I got. I think this was I had a great time talking. Hopefully we can do this again at some point, because I mean, there's definitely a whole lot more to unpack and talk about.
Yeah.
And of course, I got to learn more before I can even talk about more, and we all got to learn more.
Well, me too, actually.
Yeah.
I'm African American and Black, but I don't have the experience of everybody else in the world. Like, I mean, I didn't grow up in the inner city. I have family that I'm close to, but that wasn't my normal. I was the kid that went to a private school, and that's an engineer and inventor,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a rare position to be in anyways. So my dad did pull himself up by his bootstraps, but that's rare and it's more difficult. And I remember he told me specifically that it's because there was a white man in Philadelphia that gave him a chance, because he couldn't get a chance in North Carolina. So there's just so many stories out there. I can't claim to know half of them, just mine.
Again, I wanted to say thank you to Heather for coming out and having a great conversation. If you enjoyed the conversation with Heather, I do highly encourage that you go over to her YouTube channel, Harness Thought, and subscribe, as she has some really great videos on there. If you also enjoyed the podcast, I would encourage you to follow the podcast, as it greatly helps us out with continuing to make more conversations like this. And thank you all for listening. Have a great day.